folks, there is no time to waste. Let's go to tonight's breaking news about what happened 8 days ago. Osama bin Laden continues his crowd-pleasing death. All the newspapers are covering it, from the New York Times to the Daily News to the New York Post. But, folks, that's just New York. They are also covering it in other parts of the country, like Brooklyn. I was particularly impressed by the coverage in Der Zeitung, Brooklyn's Hasidic newspaper of record. Jim?
Now you see her, now you don't. In a Hasidic paper in New York, they ran this White House Situation Room photo from the bin Laden raid. There's one problem. It removed Hillary Clinton.
Impressive. Normally, getting rid of Hillary Clinton requires an entire presidential primary. Der Zeitung only had two options. Either take her out of the photo or hide the fact that she's a woman. For instance, by making her hand bigger. Of course, Der Zeitung's policy of removing women from photographs is not without its complications. Back in the 70s, when Golda Meir was Prime Minister of Israel, their readers assumed the country was being run by a headstrong podium. And think how hard this is on teenage Hasidic boys. Any empty spot in a photo could be a woman. Most boys hide the Victoria's Secret catalog under their beds, but I'm sure teenage Der Zeitung readers prefer Architectural Digest. Those sumptuous interiors leave everything to the imagination.
There's a shot taken inside that room of a group of top-level officials, and you can see Secretary of State Hillary Clinton very clearly on the shot on the right, as well as another woman who's a part of the administration in the back of the room there, peeking her head in. But what happened to the photo on the left? Where is Hillary, and where is that other woman? Well, it's called Photoshop, folks. This Hasidic newspaper here in New York apparently photoshopped the two women out, and it has to do with religious custom and not wanting to see women in these positions. And instead of my explaining it, let's go right now to Rabbi Brad Hirschfield, who is a FoxNews.com contributor and also the author of You Don't Have to Be Wrong for Me to Be Right, Finding Faith Without Fanaticism. And there's the book, and we'll talk about that in a bit as well. But let's talk about this photo. What happened here?
Look, what happened, and the paper has now come out and tried to explain themselves. And they said, look, our standards of modesty preclude images of women in publications. And without getting into a long technical discussion of is it true, because I think, religious communities can make their own decisions,
right.
They've defended it as an act of religious liberty, which is really quite interesting, and one I really believe in. Different religious groups, whether they're Jewish, Christian, whatever, have a right to practice as they believe they are compelled to. I think their failing here, though, was they confused having the right to do something with it being the right thing to do. I understand, although I completely disagree, and people should know it's a fairly extreme, even for the ultra-Orthodox community,
right.
A fairly extreme interpretation that even pictures of women can't be allowed.
Right.
But having said that, I think the real failing was once you make the decision to Photoshop that picture, you have an ethical obligation to tell your readership, we are presenting to you, in line with our religious beliefs, a Photoshopped image. For me, the bigger challenge is not the individual decisions religious communities make, and happily the Constitution affords them that right, and that's a sacred right, in both sense, legally and religiously.
Right.
But when you have more rights, you also assume new obligations.
Right.
And the obligations here were to tell people our particular standards make it impossible for us to share with you, our readers, what actually happened in the full totality of that picture.
Right, because otherwise, we're talking about journalists here. We're talking about a newspaper, and deleting people from a photo is lying to your readers.
Again, it's lying if you don't tell them you've done it.
Exactly.
I think it's stupid if you do it. I want to be clear.
Yeah.
There are two separate issues. The ethical issue, the lying issue, is not telling people. It's foolish, I think, because in America, whatever your tradition is, if you need to change reality so that it comports with your religious views, you can't actually report what's truly going on in the world, you're not going to make it.
Right.
So out of compassion and respect for the community, I would challenge them to rethink this policy at least some of the time, because no community in America is long for the world if they can't at least tell people what's really going on.
Right. I want to point out, and this article is on our website at foxnews.com, that this Hasidic newspaper has apologized for editing Clinton out of the photo, saying that our photo editor realized the significance of this historic moment and published the picture, but in his haste, he did not read the fine print that accompanied the picture, forbidding any changes. Shocking that they would have that. We should not have published the altered picture, the newspaper said in its statement. And it said that Clinton has served with great distinction, but the paper just does not publish images of women in accord with our religious beliefs. What do you think of
And
that?
again, I respect their right, in this case, I think, to make a wrong decision about not printing the picture.
Mm-hmm.
But what I think they failed to do, even in their apology, is deal with the real issue.
Right.
Which is the inability to tell your readers what's really going on in the world.
Right.
Now, by the way, everyone does that to some extent, which is why I think this is a real story. Because at the end of the day, a little Yiddish language newspaper in Brooklyn really makes no difference in the world.
Right.
It doesn't even make much difference, candidly, in the Jewish world.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what it's hitting for people is the fact that all of us do some editing in our lives.
Yeah.
We always would like to see the world as we wished it were, as it would fit with our views, and not always as it is. So ironically, I think they've done the world a favor if they've made us all stop and say, how often do we do our own version of this editing?
Yeah.
How often do we shy away from images and facts because they don't fit with our worldview, as opposed to saying, look, it's a fact, it doesn't fit with my worldview, and I want to change this world. That, I think, is entirely appropriate. But needing to alter the facts to fit your reality means not only the facts suffer, your reality suffers.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. It kind of makes you take a look at these things. And I saw one article just focusing on the photoshopping aspect, that saying, well, don't we all do it? I mean, don't we edit grandma's wrinkles to make them a little bit softer? And should we really be doing that? I mean, grandma is old. She earned those wrinkles. And, why are we lying about what grandma looks like? And, we do have to ask ourselves these questions, I guess. So
a Hasidic Jewish newspaper is apologizing for doctoring the historic photo released by the White House last week. By now, most people have probably seen this image of President Obama and his national security team watching and listening to the U.S. commando raid that killed Osama bin Laden. There have been parodies like this one, but it's this version, printed in a Hasidic newspaper in Brooklyn, that is causing new controversy, because the two women in the photo have been purposely removed, including Secretary of State Hillary Clinton.
This is simply a statement about modesty in the Hasidic and very right-wing Orthodox community.
Rabbi Chaim Wasserman does not endorse the paper's decision, but says it is based on religious belief.
The reason being an interpretation of Psalms 45:14, where the princess and her honor is best internalized.
We believe that women should not be in the public eye for modesty reasons, and I think that was a proper thing to do.
In a statement, the paper said it should not have altered the photo, but in its haste, the photo editor did not read the fine print. Any suggestion that the Hasidic community denigrates women is, quote, slanderous and libel.
I think people are somewhat overreacting about it. It's just these people feel that it's very necessary not to have women in their newspaper, and that's it.
Now, we are here in Passaic, home to a large Orthodox Jewish community. The majority of people we spoke to, both on camera and off, believe that too much is being made of this incident. Zach Fink, My 9 News.